What if the man everyone laughed at inside a luxury bank wasn't who they thought he was? He wore dusty boots, a torn straw hat, and carried the air of a poor farmer. The manager mocked him, the staff whispered, and the wealthy clients rolled their eyes, until he calmly asked to transfer $15 million. That's when the room froze, but no one, not even the arrogant manager in his Italian suit, could have guessed the truth. This humble-looking old man wasn't just a farmer. He was about to reveal a secret that would turn the entire bank upside down, and destroy the careers of those who dared to humiliate him. Stay with us, because once you hear who he really was, you'll never look at appearances the same way again. Before we listen to today's eye-opening story, share with us which country you're listening from and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It was a normal Thursday morning at the downtown branch of Western Heritage Bank in Austin, Texas, the city's most prestigious financial institution. The air smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume, and every customer looked like they belonged to a boardroom. That illusion shattered when the glass doors opened, and a 68-year-old farmer walked in. James "Jim" Fletcher looked painfully out of place. His straw hat had a hole in the brim. His plaid shirt was faded from decades of wear. His boots carried red dirt from the fields of his farm in Lubbock. On his wrist, a plastic watch ticked steadily, the same one he had worn for 20 years. The other customers, dressed in tailored suits and high heels, recoiled. Whispers floated through the lobby. "How did they let someone like him in here?" one woman muttered. The receptionist, Brittany Turner, rolled her eyes. She had been trained by the branch manager to filter out undesirable clients. And Jim looked like the definition of undesirable. From behind the glass walls of his office, Eric Nolan, 35, adjusted his silk tie and smirked. He was the branch manager, a man who measured worth by luxury, Italian suits, imported shoes, and a sports car parked outside. To him, the farmer was a lost soul who had wandered into the wrong building. Eric stepped out, his smile dripping with condescension. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" Jim removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and time, but eyes sharp and steady. "Yes, young man. I need to make a transfer from my account." Eric tilted his head, amused. "Of course. How much would you like to transfer?" Jim answered calmly, $15 million. "It needs to go through before 2 p.m. today." The bank froze. Brittany coughed. Clients who had been pretending not to listen now turned openly. Eric's composure cracked for a second, then he laughed so loud it echoed across the marble. $15 million? From your account? If you have that balance, old man, I'll pay you double myself. The staff chuckled. The humiliation had begun. To understand who James Fletcher really was, we must return half a century earlier. Born to poor farmhands near Plainview, Texas, Jim grew up barefoot, working the fields with his father John and helping his mother, Rosa Fletcher, stitch clothes by lamplight. Poverty was his world, but bitterness never took root. He was different, hungry to learn. While other boys fished or played, Jim read whatever he could find. Old newspapers, discarded textbooks, even product labels. His teacher, Mary Dawson, saw his gift. "This boy has a mind God himself blessed," she told anyone who would listen. She lent him her own books, and he devoured every page. At 15, Jim took a bus to Austin. He worked as a construction helper by day, slept in a shared room, and studied at night in a public prep school. By 18 he graduated top of his class. He looked in a cracked mirror and made himself a promise. "I will leave poverty behind, but I will never forget where I came from." With his first real salary as a mason, Jim did something his colleagues called madness. He bought 10 ExxonMobil shares. It wasn't much, but it was the start of a journey few would ever believe. For decades, Jim lived a life of sacrifice. He worked construction in the blistering sun, studied accounting at night, and reinvested every cent. While others spent money on drink and games, he planted financial seeds for the future. At 25, he married Helen Fletcher, a primary school teacher who saw not just the humble worker, but the extraordinary man he was becoming. Together they endured months of eating only rice, beans, and eggs, but Helen never stopped believing. "One day this will be worth it," Jim would whisper, holding her hand. "Not just for us, but to prove that simple people can win too." At 35, Jim made his boldest move. He bought a rundown 500-acre farm at an auction in Abilene, Texas. Neighbors mocked him. The land was worthless, the house a ruin. But he worked 16-hour days, applied modern techniques he'd read about in farming magazines, and within 5 years the land bloomed. His cattle thrived. His crops flourished. The mockers became seekers of advice. From that farm Jim built an empire. He bought stocks, real estate and government bonds, always with patience and discipline. By 45 he was quietly a multimillionaire. By 50 he acquired 30% of a struggling regional bank, Western Heritage Bank, and transformed it into one of the most respected institutions in Texas. But he never flaunted his wealth. He still drove an old Ford pickup, wore his straw hat and lived on the farm in Lubbock. "Money doesn't change who you are," he told Helen. "If you're good when you're poor, you'll be good when you're rich. If you're bad, money just makes it clearer." Years later, Jim began receiving letters, hundreds of them, from small clients complaining of mistreatment in his own bank's branches. Farmers ignored. Pensioners humiliated. Small entrepreneurs dismissed. Jim decided to see for himself. Not as Jim the shareholder, but as Jim the humble farmer. That's why he walked into the Austin downtown branch that morning. And that's why Eric Nolan had just made the mistake of his life. Eric demanded 17 forms, KYC protocols, income statements, and even mocked Jim's literacy. Security guard Victor Gomez hinted he should leave. Wealthy clients joined in. Richard Barrett, a businessman, sneered, "This is what happens when you mix clients." Camille Vance, a socialite, sighed dramatically about wasted time. Dr. Henry Price, a doctor, suggested Jim try a rural cooperative. Only one voice hesitated. Laura Martin, a young bank clerk. "If he already has a history of large transfers, couldn't we make an exception?" she asked timidly. Eric silenced her sharply. Jim stayed calm. "Strange," he said softly. "Because last week I transferred $20 million from this very account without a single form." The lobby fell silent. Cynthia Moore, the supervisor, whispered to Eric that she was checking the system. Her face turned pale. Jim's account showed regular multimillion transfers. Brittany, curious, peeked and gasped. The account was personal, not corporate, and flagged premium, differentiated service. Eric's smugness evaporated. Then his phone rang. The caller ID, Samuel Albright, Regional Director. "Eric," the voice thundered, "is James Fletcher in your branch?" "Yes, he's just a farmer making trouble." "Farmer?" Samuel's voice exploded. "Pass him the phone immediately and treat him with maximum respect." "That's an order." Eric's hand trembled as he handed Jim the phone. "Hello, Samuel, my son," Jim greeted warmly. "I'm here at your branch. Seems your staff have invented new protocols." The room froze. The poor farmer was speaking to the director like family. Jim pulled a tablet from his shirt pocket, its screen cracked from years of use. With a few taps he displayed notarized documents. "My name is James Fletcher," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned lobby. "And I am the principal shareholder of Western Heritage Bank." The screen showed it clearly, 43% ownership. Shock rippled through the room. Brittany gasped. Cynthia turned white. Richard's throat went dry. Camille clutched her pearls as though they might save her. Dr. Price stared at the floor. Jim's eyes swept the room. 4 months, I've received complaints of clients being treated like garbage. I came to see with my own eyes. And today you showed me exactly what those letters described. Jim stood tall in the center of the silent lobby, his straw hat casting a shadow over eyes that had seen decades of hardship and triumph. One by one he turned to face those who had ridiculed him only minutes earlier. First, his gaze landed on Richard Barrett, the businessman who had sneered about mixing clientele. "Richard," Jim said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence, "you thought you were mocking me, but you were only exposing yourself. You didn't disrespect me, you disrespected yourself. A man who measures others only by appearance learns nothing about the true value of life. Your wealth may buy cars and buildings, but it has not bought you wisdom." Richard lowered his eyes, the weight of those words heavier than any financial loss he had ever faced. Next, Jim turned toward Camille Vance, the socialite who had rolled her eyes and flaunted her jewelry. "Camille," he said, softer but no less piercing, "don't waste your breath apologizing to me. Apologize to the person you've allowed yourself to become, someone who looks down on others to feel taller. Mirrors don't lie. Tonight, when you see your reflection, ask yourself if that is truly the woman you want to be." Camille's hands trembled. For the first time, her jewels seemed like chains. Then his eyes rested on Dr. Henry Price, the respected physician who had suggested Jim go to a rural cooperative. "Doctor," Jim said gravely, "knowledge without humility is ignorance dressed in a diploma. You cure bodies, yet you have forgotten to treat people with dignity. Of all people, you should know that titles and status mean nothing when a person's heart is sick with pride." Dr. Price's face burned with shame. The truth in Jim's words struck deeper than any insult could. His gaze moved to Brittany Turner, the young receptionist who had laughed behind her hand and whispered mockery. Tears welled in her eyes before he even spoke. "Brittany," Jim said gently, "respect should never depend on knowing someone's balance. If you only treat people well when they are rich, then you have not learned respect. You've learned opportunism. And opportunism rots the soul." Finally, Jim turned to the trembling intern Ivy Cole. "Ivy," he said, his tone softening, "you followed the example of others, but when you saw your mistake you admitted it. That is courage. Recognizing an error is the first step toward correcting it. You have a chance to grow into someone better. Take it." At last, Jim's eyes locked onto Eric Nolan, the manager who had orchestrated the entire humiliation. Eric's once perfect composure had collapsed. Sweat dripped down his temple, his silk tie now felt like a noose. "Eric," Jim said, his voice like iron, "you lead this branch. You set its culture. And today you showed arrogance, cruelty, and prejudice. That is not leadership, it is poison. From this moment your career here is over. A leader must be an example, and the example you gave today has no place in Western Heritage Bank." Eric sank into a chair, his face pale as if the floor had given way beneath him. Then Jim turned to Laura Martin, who stood stunned at the edge of the group, hardly believing what was unfolding. "And you, Laura," Jim said with warmth in his voice, "you stood up for a stranger when everyone else stayed silent. You defended what was right not because you knew who I was, but because your conscience told you to. That is true leadership. From this moment, you are promoted to regional manager." Gasps filled the room. Whispers darted between employees and clients alike. Careers had ended in seconds, reputations shattered, and yet Jim's voice had never risen, his tone never wavered. Calm, steady, dignified, like the very earth he had tilled his whole life. The humiliation Eric had planned for Jim had been flipped on its head, transformed into the greatest lesson that bank, and everyone present, would ever witness. In the weeks that followed, lives unraveled. Eric lost his job, his wife, and his friends. In despair, he visited Jim's farm. "I came to ask forgiveness," he sobbed. Jim forgave him, urging him to forgive himself. Eric rebuilt his life as a salesman in a small shop, treating every customer with genuine respect. Cynthia struggled to accept her fall, but eventually found work at a cooperative and learned that humility is freedom, not humiliation. Richard's car dealership collapsed as clients fled. He tasted the judgment he once dished out. Camille became a social outcast, eventually finding redemption through volunteer work in nursing homes and orphanages. Dr. Price, wiser than most, sought Jim's counsel and began offering free medical care to poor families. But the most beautiful transformation happened with Laura Martin. As regional manager, she launched free financial education for rural workers, microcredit for small entrepreneurs, and priority service for elders and people with disabilities. "Leadership isn't about standing above people," she told her staff. "It's about standing beside them." 1 year later, Jim returned to the Austin branch, again in his dusty boots and straw hat. None of the new staff recognized him. Yet they greeted him warmly, offered him water, and asked how they could help. When he finally revealed his identity, there was no shame, only joy. They had treated him well not because of his wealth, but because they had learned to treat everyone well. That night, back on the porch of his farm in Lubbock, Jim sat with Helen under the stars. "Was it worth it?" she asked. That he smiled softly. "More than worth it. We proved the world can change, one act of respect at a time." And so, James Fletcher proved that true wealth isn't counted in money or titles, it's found in humility, dignity, and the courage to treat others with respect. But now we want to ask you, if you were in that bank, would you have judged Jim by his appearance, or would you have treated him with kindness from the very beginning? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you for tuning in to Hopeful Voices. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.